Hi everyone, my name is Nick Delmonico and I am the CEO and co-founder of Strados Labs. And at Strados Labs, we believe in making every breath count. I got into this because I myself have had asthma for a long time. I had RSV when I was born, led to a pneumonia bout and 3-week hospitalization stint. And I've been to the hospital many times for asthma exacerbation. And there are over 400 million people worldwide suffering from chronic airway diseases, and now, of course, we know due to COVID, several infectious respiratory diseases. And many of the patients, like myself, have some really key challenges around recognizing symptoms like wheezing, coughing, and shortness of breath early, before it's too late, before you end up in the hospital. And so we spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year in the US alone on chronic respiratory care management. And it's one of the most expensive respiratory clinical trials to run. It's about $40,000 per patient. And a big reason for a lot of this is because we lack objective data around understanding what's happening with patients before they end up in the four walls of a hospital. As I mentioned, the way that we typically focus on managing these chronic conditions, and as many of us know due to the COVID pandemic, the way that we monitor symptoms is by reporting them like this. Are you wheezing? Are you coughing? Are you having shortness of breath? And how bad is it today versus yesterday or the day before? Studies have shown that this is essentially a coin flip. It's about 50% right. And so if that's the data that we're using to make clinical decisions, we're mostly going to be wrong half of the time. And the technologies that are available today to measure objectively things like coughing look something like this. They weren't designed for the 21st century. They weren't designed to be real-world, decentralized, and most importantly, patient-friendly. So we envisioned a tool and a technology that allowed us to get objective data around key symptoms of lung health at any time and anywhere. And it looks something more like this. It's often described as the Holter monitor for the lungs, something that is like a stethoscope on a Band-Aid. We then have algorithms that allow us to identify what's happening within the lungs of a patient at any given time and make that available to a caregiver on a remote basis. And this is something that my team is well versed in. My CIO, Richard Powers, was the CIO of CardioMEMS and Dendrotronics and worked for over a decade with our CTO, Jason Crow, at CardioMEMS. He developed the hardware, Richard developed the software, and if you're not familiar with that technology, it was a pressure sensor that was implanted in cardiac patients and got remote data back to clinicians and drove down hospitalizations for heart failure by over 50%. So it's an area that they know well. They were developing cloud technologies before they were called cloud technologies. And our CMO, Dr. Mitchell Glass, has been practicing pulmonary medicine and working in the pharmaceutical space for longer than I have been alive. And so he's had a very successful track record in developing new technologies, getting them to market, and also having successful IPOs. And we have a deep bench of clinical and strategic advisors, including the Chief Medical Officer of the American Lung Association, Dr. Albert Rizzo, who is in our SAB, and several advisors who have worked in the pharmaceutical space as well as the health system space, commercializing new and novel technologies. So again, what is this solution that we've created? It is, as I mentioned, often described as the Holter monitor for the lungs. We're listening to breathing patterns and sounds. We are the first FDA-cleared system to do this in a completely non-invasive and wireless way. And we have algorithms that allow us to identify when a wheezing event occurs, differentiate that from a normal breath. As I mentioned, are 510K cleared now. We have a CE mark class 1 submission that we are putting in the next week. So we expect to have a CE mark by the end of the month, if not early June. We also have, unlike just a stethoscope device, we have motion sensors, accelerometers that allow us to capture breathing patterns and pair that with the sound data. So we know the difference between an inspiratory or expiratory phase, wheeze or cough, and we also use that for respiratory rate, chest wall expansion, and excursion. The technology has been validated in several clinical trials, including some that we have utilized our NSF Phase 1 SBIR grant for, and we are submitting a Phase 2 grant in June and hoping to get that by the end of the year. We can identify coughing at an over 95% accuracy rate based on clinical decision as well. We've conducted studies in 4 different trial sites across the country with over 100 patients, and that data has also been submitted to the FDA as part of our 510K package. Our beachhead opportunity is to work within the pharmaceutical system where they want to measure when these events are happening, when a patient is experiencing wheezing or coughing as a clinical endpoint. And for chronic refractory cough, it is a primary endpoint today. It's about $11 million revenue opportunity, which is not a major market, but we can own that market within the next 12 months and expand upon that to now create a bioacoustic standardization for wheezing and wheezometry, if you will, that allows pharmaceutical companies to be able to use that as an objective measure to determine whether or not patients are getting better or worse as part of the treatment. It's nearly $750 million revenue opportunity if we get into the entire global respiratory trial space. And as you can imagine, all of the data that we're collecting allows us to get into what will be a telepulmonary care market. We're now working with some of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, and some of them are listed here on the screen. We have over $1 million of contracts for 2 different projects that are starting in the summer of this year, and we expect to have 5 under contract by the end of this year, all of which are focused on cough and wheeze detection as part of infectious or chronic respiratory disease trials. Our business model is fairly simple. It's hardware, it's software, it's analytics. We charge on a per-patient basis. It varies depending on the size of the trial, the length of the trial, and the goals of the trial. But generally speaking, it's about $3,000 per patient. And the size of these trials, again, varies, but is on average about 300 patients. So it's a roughly $1 million contract opportunity. And again, if we are able to achieve the entire addressable market, it's a nearly $750 million revenue opportunity. And I want to focus in just quickly on what these opportunities look like. When we work within a particular pharmaceutical system, they have both phase 2 trials in multiple different diseases, multiple different drugs in their pipeline, and then those scale from phase 2 to phase 3 or phase 4. So these life cycle and customer value can significantly increase from, for example, the $1 million contract we have now to over $10 million in the next 36 months. We tackle this by getting integrated directly with channel partners, including CROs and clinical trial solutions businesses, which reduces our need to do field sales. And again, is a stepping stone for us into a much bigger and more exciting market, which is to monitor and manage patients who have chronic respiratory conditions in the tele-ICU all the way to the home and remote patient monitoring. We align the business model for those particular use cases with the payment systems within the health system, as well as the remote patient monitoring and telehealth codes that are available. And we have a much bigger vision here to reduce cost and improve quality of care. So we've achieved the first part of our vision, and we're raising money now to achieve the next part, which is to scale and hopefully make every breath count. So if you have any interest in learning more, let me know. Thank you for your time.